There's probably no more classic looking cabinet door than one with a raised panel inside of it, and you can make these raised panels in a number of different styles at your router table. In this video, I'm going to share 5 tips for panel raising success. A raised panel has a flat field area in the middle, a routed profile around the show face that gives the field area its raised appearance, and 1/4-inch thick edges that fit into the rails and stiles of a cabinet door's frame. And the router bits for raising panels come in a number of different styles and shapes. Panel raisers are large, heavy bits intended to be used only on a router table with a fence. And if they're used carefully with safety in mind, they'll produce results as good as you'll find on a cabinet door made in a factory. But if you misuse a panel raising bit, you can compromise your safety really quick, or even ruin the panel you're trying to make. So to help you avoid some pitfalls, here are 5 tips to keep in mind. Here's tip number 1. Be sure to choose the right router and bit combination. Panel raising bits come in 2 primary styles, vertical and horizontal. Vertical panel raising bits have a smaller diameter and a tall cutting profile. And horizontal panel raising bits have a much larger diameter and a shorter cutting profile. They're also typically the heavier of the 2 styles. If you've got a compact router like this in the 1 horsepower range with a 1/4-inch collet, you're out of luck for panel raising because it's probably obvious, but it's just too small for the job. And you won't even be able to find a panel raising bit to fit it because they're all 1/2-inch shank. But if you've got a mid-size router in the 2 horsepower range like this Milwaukee, it's up to task for panel raising. And the best choices of bits for it are vertical panel raisers because of their smaller diameters and lighter weights. Or choose the smaller, lighter horizontal panel raisers. But the best all-around router for panel raising is a full-size router in the 3 horsepower range like this Porter Cable. A full-size router is powerful enough and built ruggedly enough to handle any of the panel raising bits, from vertical styles on up to the largest horizontal styles. And here's tip number 2. Dial down the speed. Large, heavy panel raising bits like this develop a lot of gyroscopic force as they spin, and the circumference of the bit is spinning much faster than the shank. So you want to keep all of this mass under control. That's why when you're using big horizontal panel raising bits, set your router speed to only about 1/2 to 2/3 of its maximum RPM. The bit will cut at a safer speed at its outer edge without compromising cutting quality. Let's say you've got your raised panel bit installed, your router speed is set correctly, and your fence is locked in place. You're ready to start routing. But is there anything you need to know about that? Well, that leads me to my 3rd tip, and that is tip number 3. Always start with cross grain. When you route across the grain, it's not uncommon for this unsupported corner to tear out. So if you start with a cross grain cut, you can clean up this tear out with a long grain cut. So when you're routing a raised panel, just remember, cross grain for cut 1, long grain for cut 2, cross grain for cut 3, and long grain for cut 4. One of the goals of raising panels is to get the edges thin enough to fit into the grooves of the rails and stiles of a cabinet door. So here's a tip for that. Tip number 4, sneak up on the grooves. When you're raising panels, you don't want to route away all the waste in a single pass. It'll overload the router and the bit, lead to burn marks in the wood, and it could even cause a dangerous kickback. Instead, plan to make several rounds of shallow cuts to remove the waste a little at a time. Raise the bit a 1/16 of an inch or so after each round of cuts so you can sneak up on the right edge thickness and cut the wood as cleanly as possible. The goal is for the edges of the panels to fit the grooves in the rails and stiles snugly, but not tightly, and so the doors won't rattle when they're assembled, because rattling cabinet doors are annoying. Our 5th and last tip has to do with vertical panel raising bits. With these, you'll be routing the panel against the fence rather than face down on the table. So here's tip number 5. Use a tall fence with vertical panel raising bits. The fence doesn't have to be fancy. A wide piece of plywood with a cutout for the bit attached to the body of your regular fence is all it really takes. This way, the raised panel will have plenty of vertical support when you push it past the bit. And since it's less likely to tip away from the fence, its edges will end up consistently thick. Raising panels on a router table may be one of the more ambitious techniques you try, at least as far as bit sizes are concerned. But with a little know-how, it's not hard or unsafe. I hope these 5 tips help you get better results. I'm Chris Marshall with Woodworkers Journal Magazine in Rockler, and thanks for watching.